Hi, my name is Brian Weinert, and I'm the Director of Technology for Leiden High School District 212 in Illinois. This is a demonstration of how you can set up a Google spreadsheet with a script to create a working rubric that will email your students their scores and feedback. Let me start by showing you the finished product. Here I have a spreadsheet called Working Rubric, and you have columns for your students' first name, last name, and email address. And then for each category in my rubric, I have a column. So some of you might have something that looks similar to this. This is a rubric I borrowed from one of our acting instructors. And there are categories called group workload, acting strength, vocal, and blocking. And then for each category, you can see the points available and the comment or description of that point total. So that translates over to my spreadsheet by having columns for each category. There's my group workload, acting, vocal, and blocking. And then I included a column for total points and a column for some free text comments. So you would have all of your students' names listed here, and I will have some additional tutorials for how to copy and paste your students' information from other resources. But for now, in this example, I'm just going to type in my first and last name and the email address that I'd like this feedback to go to. For each of my rubric categories, I set up the column to show you a drop-down list of the available points in each category, since in this case they were different. So for my group work, I can see I can have points 1, 2, 4, or 5. So I'll give myself a 2 for group work. For acting, I'll give myself a 5. For vocal, I'll give myself a 4. And for blocking, I'll give myself a 2. And then you can see that I've earned a total of 13 points. And I can then enter some free text comments. At this point, I would like to send myself this feedback in the form of an email. Now, I've already installed the mail merge script I need, so I just want to show you how this works. I'm going to go to the mail merge menu and choose standard merge. It's going to ask me to choose the template that I want. These templates are all stored as drafts in my email, or in the teacher's email. So I'm going to choose this scene grade and feedback template and then just hit send mails. Once it's done processing, you'll get the message the merge is done, and you'll see that a new column has been added called merge status. And when I mouse over this cell for this record, I see that it's not just done, but I also get the date and time that it was completed. So now let me go to my email as if I was the student receiving this message. Here's the email come through, and when I open it up, I get the message, "Hello Brian, here are your grades and feedback from your recent scene," and for each one of the categories in the rubric, I get the points and how many it was out of, and I actually get the comment or description that corresponds to that point total. At the bottom, I get the total points earned and the free text comments. At this point, let me walk you through how I set up this spreadsheet and added the script needed to complete this process. The nice part is once you do this one time, you can easily copy the spreadsheet and adjust it or tweak it for future rubrics. So I'm going to start by going into my Google Drive and creating a new spreadsheet. I'll give it the title Working Rubric 2. And at this point, I'm just going to define my columns with column headings. So I'm going to have my student's first name, last name, and email. And then I'm going to start adding in the column headings for each category in my rubric. So the first one I had was group. Now, what you didn't see in my example was that column E was hidden. What that column is the actual group comment that goes along with the point total. As a teacher, I don't need to see each of the comments for each of the students because I know what the rubric is, and it just takes up a lot of real estate in my spreadsheet, so I've hidden those columns. But when you're creating this from scratch, you need to make sure that you include them. So now I'm going to go on to my acting points and acting comment, vocal points and vocal comment, blocking points and blocking comment. And once you've added in columns for each of your categories, you can also add a total column to total up the points, and if you choose, a column for free text comments. Now, the next step in this process is to create a sheet in this workbook for each one of the rubric categories to serve as a crosswalk table or a lookup table. So, I'm going to add a sheet by clicking on the Add Sheet button in the bottom left corner. I'm going to rename it Group. And in this spreadsheet, in column A, I'm going to define all of the points possible, and in column B, I'm going to define the associated comment or description. To save time in this working example, I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this information in. So again, this spreadsheet serves as the rubric breakdown for the group category, the points in column A and the description or comment in column B. So I'm going to repeat that now for my acting category. And again, to save time, I'm just going to copy and paste. Add another sheet for my vocal category. Copy and paste. And one more sheet for my blocking category. And one more copy and paste. So now I'm going to go back to my main working sheet. Now, an option that you could do, instead of typing in the numbers for each of the students in the group, acting, vocal, and blocking columns, you could choose to make each of those cells a drop-down menu to show you the acceptable or valid points in each one of the categories. To do that, you need to add data validation to each of those columns. So for column D, this is where I'm going to enter the group scores for each of my students. I'm going to right-click on that column heading, scroll down to data validation, and in this window, under criteria, I'm going to choose items from a list. And then with the create list from range option checked, I'm going to choose my cell range to look through. So I'm going to click on this get data range icon. It's going to ask me what data. So I'm going to go to my group sheet and highlight column A, because I want those numbers to be what shows up in the list. And then I'll click OK. I do want to allow invalid data but show warnings, because I have column headers that do not fit into these numbers, and I do want to include these items in a drop-down menu. So I'm going to hit save. If I go back to my sheet, you'll now notice if I click on any cell in column D, I get a little drop-down arrow, which will then show me all of the valid scores in this category. So let me repeat this process 3 more times for my other categories. Right-click on the column heading, scroll down to data validation, choose criteria, items from list, choose to get the data from a range, choose the correct sheet, highlight column A, and click OK. Leave everything else checked and hit save. back on my main sheet. I'm going to repeat this for my vocal category. And one last time for my blocking category. So now, when I'm ready to do the assessment of my students, I can use these drop-down menus in each of the categories to remind myself of what the valid scores are. This is extremely helpful if all of the scores are not valid in each of the categories. The next thing that I want to do is I want to bring in the associated comment or description for each one of the scores. To do this, I'm going to use a formula called VLOOKUP. So for column E, my group comment, I'm going to start by typing an equal sign to define it as a formula, and then type in VLOOKUP. And as you start typing this in, you'll notice that you get a pop-up help menu so that you get some assistance for the development of your formula. You'll see that in this particular formula there are 4 pieces of information you need to include. The first piece is what you are searching for. The second piece, or the array, is where you're searching for it. The third piece is the index, or what you are going to return as a result of finding what you're searching for. And the last option in the formula, the sort order, is to define whether or not you need an exact match or just the first one in the column. So for this particular function or formula, I'm going to type in a parentheses. And what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for the score that I entered in cell D2. So I simply just click on D2, which brings that as my search criteria into my formula. Then I put a comment. Now I need to tell it where to search. Well, I want to search in the group sheet. So I'm going to click on that. And I want to search in columns A and B. And then I put a comma. And I have to tell it what to return when I find that, in this case, number. Well, I want to return the associated comment. And that's in column 2. So I type a 2. And then I put a comma. And because I want to find an exact match, I'm going to type in the word false. End with the parentheses and hit enter. Just to show you how this works now, if I go into the group column and identify a score of 1, it's going to bring in the associated comment that goes along with score number 1. If I were to change this to a 2, you'll see the comment change, and so on. And if I were to delete the score, the comment is going to be blank. Let me repeat that 3 more times for my other categories. So for acting comment equals VLOOKUP, I want to look up from the column just to the left. So I'm going to click on F2, comma. Where I'm searching is in the acting sheet in columns A and B. So I highlight those, comma. I want to return the data from the second column, and then comma, false for an exact match. For my vocal comment equals VLOOKUP parentheses, cell H2, comma, searching in the vocal sheet columns A and B, comma, returning the data from column 2, comma, and false makes it an exact match. One more time for my blocking comment equals VLOOKUP parentheses, searching for the data from cell J2, comma, in the blocking sheet in columns A and B, comma, returning the data from the second column, comma, and then false makes it an exact match. At this point, you'll want to remember that you need to copy this formula to all of the rows for each of your students. Please remember that in a spreadsheet, you can copy a formula down by clicking on the cell that contains the formula, then choosing the bottom right corner of the cell and dragging down. You'll now notice that if I click on this cell here in E17, my formula is look up the value in D17 in sheet called group in columns A and B, return the second column and false. So it automatically updated the formula to search for the correct criteria. And you want to redo that for each of the comment columns for however many students you have. Now, I really don't need to see these comments and take up all of this real estate on this particular spreadsheet. So, if you right-click on the column heading, you can hide the column. So now, as I see all of my students listed, all I would be doing was clicking on each of the cells and choosing the correct point value, knowing that the comment will be brought in but is hidden from view. The next thing that I'd like to add to this working rubric is a sum of the points in each of the categories. So I'm going to do that in my total column that I defined earlier. So in this case, I'm just going to say equals my group points, which are in D2, plus my acting points from F2, plus my vocal points from H2, plus my blocking points from J2, and hit enter. Right now, the sum is 0, but as I start choosing points, you'll notice that the total points are updating automatically. Again, you'll need to copy this formula down by dragging it from the bottom right corner to all of the cells for each of your students. At this point, your spreadsheet is ready to go. You can start using it and entering your students and recording the points in each of the categories for their assessment. The next step is we want to be able to email all of this information and scores back to the student. So there are a number of different mail merge scripts out there. One of the ones that I like is called Yet Another Mail Merge. The reason I like that is because it lets you create the email as a draft in your inbox, and then you can reuse it over and over. So to insert this script into this spreadsheet, go up to the Insert menu and choose Script. If you do a search for Yet Another, you should see the Yet Another Mail Merge script. Choose to install. It's going to ask you to authorize the script and grant access to your Gmail and contacts. Once that's done, you can close here. The script is ready to go, and you'll notice that you've added a mail merge menu to your spreadsheet. In order to get this to work, as I mentioned, you first have to create an email draft that you are going to save in your email inbox. So let's take a look at what that would be. Here's the draft that I have here called Scene Grade and Feedback. I've got a subject, and then I've got the body of my email. And you'll notice these areas that have the double arrow brackets. Those are mail merge fields. They directly correspond with the titles or the headers of the columns in my spreadsheet. So, for example, if I want to write hello and include the student's first name, I would type hello, then a space, then open arrows, 2 of them, and then first, because that's what I used in my spreadsheet, first. So it has to match exactly. And then you close off the brackets with the opposite arrows. Make sure you use 2 of them. But you can write anything you want, and just anywhere you want to insert an item from the spreadsheet, make sure you put that column header exactly in between a set of arrow brackets, double arrow brackets. So you can see the way that I have this designed. Hello, first name. Here are your grades and feedback from your recent scene. Then I wrote the category title, group workload, and I brought in the group score, and I wrote out of 5. And then below that, I included the details from the group comment column. And then I repeated that for each one of the categories. I then have a total and comments. And then I signed it with my name. You could even, if you chose to, add an attachment to this email that would be saved. Maybe the original rubric that you passed out to your students. Once you have this template defined, just close it and save it, which will then keep it in your draft section of your inbox. Then, when you go back to your spreadsheet and you're ready to start sending emails to your students, all you need to do, so to demonstrate that this works, I'm going to go ahead and enter in some information. The student's first name and last name, the email address, and then I'll assign some points. There's my total. Here is the free text comment. And I'm ready to email this student with the results. So I'm going to hit Mail Merge, Standard Merge. The very first time you enable this or run this script, it's going to ask you to define which column has the email addresses. So I'm going to choose the column that I titled Email. You will only be asked to do that once. And then I have to choose which template. Well, I know that that was my draft email titled Scene, Grade, and Feedback. You can choose whether or not you want to receive a copy of each email, and then hit Send Mails. It's going to take some time to process each of the students. Now my merge is done. You'll notice that for my first record, it says done, and if I mouse over it, it tells me the time and date. Now I have errors for each of these other rows because while I put some data into the formula columns, there was no email address to pull from, which is why it's telling me that it was an error. But if I go back to my email inbox, there's my most recent email with all of the scores and comments for this particular student. I hope you found this tutorial beneficial and you find some creative ways to start using these techniques to creating your own working rubrics that you can use to email your students their scores and feedback. As I mentioned earlier, please also remember that once you invest the time to creating this first rubric, you can always go to File, Make Copy to duplicate this spreadsheet and then tweak it for other rubrics that you need. Thanks a lot for watching, and good luck.